The bank manager's expression shifted from confusion to concern as she slid the loan document across her desk. "Ms. Harrison, according to our records, you've already signed over your estate as collateral for your brother's business loan." My world stopped spinning. I hadn't signed anything. Looking down at the perfectly forged signature, I realized 15 years of protecting my younger brother had led to this moment of betrayal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of my office at Harrison Financial Consulting, where I'd spent the last decade building my reputation as one of Boston's most respected financial advisors. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd helped countless clients protect their assets, yet I'd failed to protect my own from the person I trusted most. "Catherine, there's a Mr. Thomas Blake from First National online too." My assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "He says it's urgent." I reached for the phone, expecting another routine inquiry about one of my high-net-worth clients. Instead, what I heard would unravel everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. "Ms. Harrison, I apologize for the unusual call, but we've noticed some discrepancies in your brother Marcus's loan application. Would you be available to meet this afternoon?" My stomach tightened. Marcus, my younger brother by 4 years, had been asking for financial advice about expanding his tech startup. He'd mentioned seeking funding, but something in Mr. Blake's tone set off warning bells. "Of course," I replied, maintaining my professional composure. "I can be there at 3. As I hung up, memories flooded back. Marcus standing in my doorway, 6 months ago, his characteristic charm in full force. "Kathy, you're the only one who's always believed in me. Remember when Mom and Dad said I'd never make it in tech? Well, I'm about to prove them wrong. This new venture will change everything." I'd smiled then, proud of his determination. Our parents had always been traditionally minded, believing in steady jobs and predictable careers. I'd followed that path, building my consulting firm methodically over years. Marcus had chosen a different route, chasing one brilliant idea after another. I'd supported him through each venture, each failure, each new beginning. While our parents shook their heads, I'd been his cheerleader, his confidant, his safety net. Opening my laptop, I began pulling up property records for the estate I'd inherited from our grandmother. The Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Cambridge had been her final gift to me, a recognition of the countless hours I'd spent with her in my youth, learning about investments and financial responsibility while Marcus was off pursuing his latest passion. "Your brother has a beautiful mind, Catherine," she'd told me shortly before her passing. "But you have something rarer: wisdom. This house isn't just a property, it's a foundation for your future. Guard it well." The property records loaded, and my blood ran cold. There it was, a recent filing linking my estate to a commercial loan application. A loan I'd never approved. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hey sis, incredible news. Just closed a major funding round. Drinks tonight to celebrate? Your treat, as always." The casual presumption in his message, once endearing, now felt like another manipulation. How many times had I picked up the check, covered his rent during lean months, invested in his ventures? I'd always seen it as investing in his potential, but now. Walking to the window, I watched the rain transform the Boston skyline into a watercolor of grays and silvers. The city had taught me hard lessons about money and trust throughout my career. Now it seemed those lessons were about to become painfully personal. My computer chimed with an email from my assistant. She'd pulled the background documents I'd requested on Marcus's new company, Harrison Tech Solutions. The financials painted a troubling picture: multiple maxed-out credit lines, irregular cash flows, and a pattern of increasingly desperate funding attempts. The grandfather clock in my office, another inheritance from our grandmother, struck 2. In 1 hour, I'd face the truth about just how far my brother's deception had gone. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, not just for my own assets, but for the trust my clients placed in me. How could I advise others on protecting their wealth if I couldn't protect my own? I gathered my documents with trembling hands, each paper a potential piece of evidence against my own brother. The rain had stopped, but dark clouds still loomed over the city. As I stepped into my car, another text from Marcus lit up my phone. BTW, might need your financial advice soon. Big expansion plans in the works. If only he knew that in less than an hour, his plans would crumble like a house of cards, and I would be the one holding the decisive card, the truth that would change everything. First National Bank's granite. Facade loomed before me, its glass doors reflecting the afternoon sun. Inside, the marble floors echoed with each step as I followed the receptionist to the conference room. The space felt smaller than I remembered from my frequent client meetings here, perhaps because this time I was on the other side of the equation. Thomas Blake, the bank's senior loan officer, greeted me with a handshake that was both professional and hesitant. Next to him sat Sarah Chen, the bank's chief risk officer, her presence confirming my worst fears about the severity of the situation. Ms. Harrison, Blake began, his voice carefully measured. Thank you for coming on such short notice. We've encountered some irregularities that require immediate attention. Chen opened a leather portfolio, removing a stack of documents with color-coded tabs. As you're aware, your brother Marcus Harrison submitted a loan application for $8 million to fund his technology venture. She paused, studying my expression. The application listed substantial collateral, including a Victorian estate in Cambridge valued at $5 million. My grandmother's house, the property I'd spent years restoring, turning it into not just a home, but a testament to her legacy. Each room held memories of afternoon teas and financial lessons that had shaped my career path. I'm looking at the property deed, Chen continued, which shows your ownership. However, we also have documentation indicating your consent to use this property as collateral. She slid a document across the table, my apparent signature flowing across the bottom in familiar blue ink. I leaned forward, examining the forgery. It was good. Remarkably good. Marcus had always been gifted at replicating signatures, a talent that had gotten him into trouble in high school. I'd defended him then, convinced our parents that it was just youthful mischief. Now, that same skill had evolved into something far more sinister. This isn't my signature, I stated firmly, my voice steadier than I felt. I never authorized my property to be used as collateral for any loan. Blake and Chen exchanged glances. Ms. Harrison, Blake said carefully, given your professional background, you understand the serious implications here. If what you're saying is true, it's fraud, I finished for him. My brother has committed loan fraud, and I intend to prove it. My phone buzzed again, another text from Marcus. Kathy, why is the bank calling me about documentation? Verification? Can you help smooth this over? You know how bureaucratic these places can be. The casual tone, the assumption that I would once again step in to fix his problems, made something snap inside me. For years, I'd enabled his behavior, cushioned his falls, protected him from consequences. All under the guise of being a supportive sister, I'd actually been preventing him from facing reality. Chen's voice cut through my thoughts. We've frozen the loan processing, but given the amount involved and the nature of the documentation, we're obligated to report this to the authorities. I understand, I replied, years of professional experience helping me maintain composure. I'll provide full cooperation, and I'll need copies of everything, every document, every form, every communication between my brother and the bank. As Chen gathered the documents, I noticed a pattern emerging. The loan application wasn't just a single act of desperation. It was part of a larger scheme. Marcus had created an elaborate web of misrepresentations, using my reputation in the financial community to bolster his claims. There's something else, Blake added, hesitation clear in his voice. We've received similar loan applications at 3 other banks, all using your property as collateral. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust, about family, about everything I'd built. My brother hadn't just tried to steal my property. He'd attempted to leverage it multiple times, potentially ruining both our reputations in the process. Standing at the bank's window, watching the late afternoon traffic flow past, I made a decision. Years of protecting Marcus had led to this moment, but it would also end here. Sometimes true love means allowing people to face the consequences of their actions. Sometimes the most supportive thing you can do is stop supporting destructive behavior. My phone buzzed one final time. Come on, sis. You always said you believed in me. Don't let some banking bureaucrat stand in the way of my dreams. I turned to Blake and Chen, my voice firm. I'd like to file a formal complaint, and I want every detail of this investigation documented. It's time for things to change. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of my office at Harrison Financial Consulting, where I'd spent the last decade building my reputation as one of Boston's most respected financial advisors. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd helped countless clients protect their assets, yet I'd failed to protect my own from the person I trusted most. Catherine, there's a Mr. Thomas Blake from First National online too, my assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. He says it's urgent. I reached for the phone, expecting another routine inquiry about one of my high-net-worth clients. Instead, what I heard would unravel everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Ms. Harrison, I apologize for the unusual call, but we've noticed some discrepancies in your brother Marcus's loan application. Would you be available to meet this afternoon? My stomach tightened. Marcus, my younger brother by 4 years, had been asking for financial advice about expanding his tech startup. He'd mentioned seeking funding, but something in Mr. Blake's tone set off warning bells. Of course, I replied, maintaining my professional composure. I can be there at 3. As I hung up, memories flooded back. Marcus standing in my doorway, 6 months ago, his characteristic charm in full force. Kathy, you're the only one who's always believed in me. Remember when Mom and Dad said I'd never make it in tech? Well, I'm about to prove them wrong. This new venture will change everything. I'd smiled then, proud of his determination. Our parents had always been traditionally minded, believing in steady jobs and predictable careers. I'd followed that path, building my consulting firm methodically over years. Marcus had chosen a different route, chasing one brilliant idea after another. I'd supported him through each venture, each failure, each new beginning. While our parents shook their heads, I'd been his cheerleader, his confidant, his safety net. Opening my laptop, I began pulling up property records for the estate I'd inherited from our grandmother. The Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Cambridge had been her final gift to me, a recognition of the countless hours I'd spent with her in my youth, learning about investments and financial responsibility while Marcus was off pursuing his latest passion. Your brother has a beautiful mind, Catherine, she'd told me shortly before her passing. But you have something rarer, wisdom. This house isn't just a property. It's a foundation for your future. Guard it well. The property records loaded, and my blood ran cold. There it was. A recent filing linking my estate to a commercial loan application. A loan I'd never approved. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Hey sis, incredible news. Just closed a major funding round. Drinks tonight to celebrate? Your treat, as always. The casual presumption in his message, once endearing, now felt like another manipulation. How many times had I picked up the check, covered his rent during lean months, invested in his ventures? I'd always seen it as investing in his potential, but now? Walking to the window, I watched the rain transform the Boston skyline into a watercolor of grays and silvers. The city had taught me hard lessons about money and trust throughout my career. Now, it seemed those lessons were about to become painfully personal. My computer chimed with an email from my assistant. She'd pulled the background documents I'd requested on Marcus's new company, Harrison Tech Solutions. The financials painted a troubling picture. Multiple maxed-out credit lines, irregular cash flows, and a pattern of increasingly desperate funding attempts. The grandfather clock in my office, another inheritance from our grandmother, struck too. In 1 hour, I'd face the truth about just how far my brother's deception had gone. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, not just for my own assets, but for the trust my clients placed in me. How could I advise others on protecting their wealth if I couldn't protect my own? I gathered my documents with trembling hands, each paper a potential piece of evidence against my own brother. The rain had stopped, but dark clouds still loomed over the city. As I stepped into my car, another text from Marcus lit up my phone. BTW. Might need your financial advice. Soon. Big expansion plans in the works. If only he knew that in less than an hour, his plans would crumble like a house of cards. And I would be the one holding the decisive card, the truth that would change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The evening sky had turned a deep indigo by the time I arrived at Marcus's startup office in Cambridge's Innovation District. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see him pacing, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to someone on the phone. The modern office space, with its sleek furniture and elaborate coffee station, suddenly seemed like an elaborate facade, much like my brother's integrity. My heels clicked against the polished concrete floors as I entered, each step echoing, with purpose. Marcus's face lit up when he saw me, that familiar, charismatic smile spreading across his features. He quickly ended his call and spread his arms wide, as if expecting our usual warm embrace. Kathy, perfect timing. I just closed another round of seed funding. We should celebrate. There's this new rooftop restaurant that would be perfect for... I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. The stack of bank documents felt heavy in my briefcase, each page a weight of betrayal I could no longer carry. We need to talk about the loan applications, Marcus. All 4 of them. His smile flickered, but didn't completely fade, a testament to years of practiced charm. Oh, that? Just a minor misunderstanding with the paperwork. I knew you'd help. Straighten it out. You always do. A minor misunderstanding? I withdrew the forged documents, laying them on his pristine glass desk one by one. You forged my signature. You attempted to use my property, grandmother's house, as collateral without my knowledge. You tried to leverage my reputation, to secure millions in fraudulent loans. Marcus's facade began to crack. Come on, sis. You know I would have made it work. My company's about to explode. We're on the verge of something huge. I just needed a little help getting over this. Final hurdle. A little help? My voice remained steady, but I could feel years of suppressed frustration rising. I've given you a little help your entire life. I covered your college expenses when you decided to drop out. I invested in your failed cryptocurrency venture. I paid your rent for 2 years while you found yourself. But this crosses every line. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of our childhood when he'd been caught in a lie. What was I supposed to do? The investors needed to see more solid backing. Your property was just sitting there, appreciating in value. I knew once the company took off, I could. It wasn't yours to use, I interrupted. That house isn't just property. It's everything I've worked for. Everything grandmother believed in. She trusted me with her legacy because she knew I understood the value of hard work and integrity. Marcus's expression hardened. Of course, bring up grandmother. Her perfect eldest grandchild, the one who could do no wrong. You have no idea what it's like living in your shadow, always being compared to your success. My success? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. My success came from years of dedication, of building trust with clients, of doing things the right way. You've always looked for shortcuts, Marcus, and I've always been there to catch you when they failed. But not this time. His face paled. What do you mean? I've filed a formal complaint with the bank. All 4 banks, actually. The authorities have been notified about the attempted fraud. You're joking, he scoffed, but fear had crept into his voice. You wouldn't do that to your own brother. I'm doing this because you're my brother, I replied, my voice softening slightly. For too long, I've protected you from the consequences of your actions. I thought I was helping you, but I was actually preventing you from growing up, from learning the true value of integrity and hard work. Marcus slumped into his ergonomic chair, the bravado finally falling away. They'll shut down my company, everything I've built. You haven't built anything real, I said gently. You've created an illusion, supported by other people's trust and resources. It's time to face reality. As I turned to leave, he called out, his voice cracking, Kathy, please, I'll lose everything. I paused at the door, thinking of our grandmother's words about wisdom being rarer than talent. Sometimes we need to lose everything we've pretended to be in order to become who we're meant to be. First National Bank's granite facade loomed before me, its glass doors reflecting the afternoon sun. Inside, the marble floors echoed with each step as I followed the receptionist to the conference room. The space felt smaller than I remembered from my frequent client meetings here, perhaps because this time I was on the other side of the equation. Thomas Blake, the bank's senior loan officer, greeted me with a handshake that was both professional and hesitant. Next to him sat Sarah Chen, the bank's chief risk officer, her presence confirming my worst fears about the severity of the Ms. Harrison, Blake began, his voice carefully measured. Thank you for coming on such short notice. We've encountered some irregularities that require immediate attention. Chen opened a leather portfolio, removing a stack of documents with color-coded tabs. As you're aware, your brother Marcus Harrison submitted a loan application for $8 million to fund his technology venture. She paused, studying my expression. The application listed substantial collateral, including a Victorian estate in Cambridge valued at $5 million. My grandmother's house, the property I'd spent years restoring, turning it into not just a home but a testament to her legacy. Each room held memories of afternoon teas and financial lessons that had shaped my career path. I'm looking at the property deed, Chen continued, which shows your ownership. However, we also have documentation indicating your consent to use this property as collateral. She slid a document across the table, my apparent signature flowing across the bottom in familiar blue ink. I leaned forward, examining the forgery. It was good, remarkably good. Marcus had always been gifted at replicating signatures, a talent that had gotten him into trouble in high school. I'd defended him then, convinced our parents that it was just youthful mischief. Now, that same skill had evolved into something far more sinister. This isn't my signature, I stated firmly, my voice steadier than I felt. I never authorized my property to be used as collateral for any loan. Blake and Chen exchanged glances. Ms. Harrison, Blake said carefully, given your professional background, you understand the serious implications here, if what you're saying is true. It's fraud, I finished for him. My brother has committed loan fraud, and I intend to prove it. My phone buzzed again, another text from Marcus. Kathy, why is the bank calling me about documentation? Verification? Can you help smooth this over? You know how bureaucratic these places can be. The casual tone, the assumption that I would once again step in to fix his problems, made something snap inside me. For years I'd enabled his behavior, cushioned his falls, protected him from consequences. All under the guise of being a supportive sister, I'd actually been preventing him from facing reality. Chen's voice cut through my thoughts. We've frozen the loan processing, but given the amount involved and the nature of the documentation, we're obligated to report this to the authorities. I understand, I replied, years of professional experience helping me maintain composure. I'll provide full cooperation, and I'll need copies of everything, every document, every form, every communication between my brother and the bank. As Chen gathered the documents, I noticed a pattern emerging. The loan application wasn't just a single act of desperation, it was part of a larger scheme. Marcus had created an elaborate web of misrepresentations, using my reputation in the financial community to bolster his claims. There's something else, Blake added, hesitation clear in his voice. We've received similar loan applications at 3 other banks, all using your property as collateral. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about trust, about family, about everything I'd built. My brother hadn't just tried to steal my property. He'd attempted to leverage it multiple times, potentially ruining both our reputations in the process. Standing at the bank's window, watching the late afternoon traffic flow past, I made a decision. Years of protecting Marcus had led to this moment, but it would also end here. Sometimes true love means allowing people to face the consequences of their actions. Sometimes the most supportive thing you can do is stop supporting destructive behavior. My phone buzzed one final time. Come on, sis. You always said you believed in me. Don't let some banking bureaucrats stand in the way of my dreams. I turned to Blake and Chen, my voice firm. I'd like to file a formal complaint, and I want every detail of this investigation documented. It's time for things to change. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of my office at Harrison Financial Consulting, where I'd spent the last decade building my reputation as one of Boston's most respected financial advisors. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd helped countless clients protect their assets, yet I'd failed to protect my own from the person I trusted most. Catherine, there's a Mr. Thomas Blake from First National on line 2. My assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. He says it's urgent. I reached for the phone, expecting another routine inquiry about one of my high-net-worth clients. Instead, what I heard would unravel everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. Ms. Harrison, I apologize for the unusual call, but we've noticed some discrepancies in your brother Marcus's loan application. Would you be available to meet this afternoon? My stomach tightened. Marcus, my younger brother by 4 years, had been asking for financial advice about expanding his tech startup. He'd mentioned seeking funding, but something in Mr. Blake's tone set off warning bells. Of course, I replied, maintaining my professional composure. I can be there at 3. As I hung up, memories flooded back. Marcus standing in my doorway. 6 months ago, his characteristic charm in full force. Kathy, you're the only one who's always believed in me. Remember when Mom and Dad said I'd never make it in tech? Well, I'm about to prove them wrong. This new venture will change everything. I'd smiled then, proud of his determination. Our parents had always been traditionally minded, believing in steady jobs and predictable careers. I'd followed that path, building my consulting firm methodically over years. Marcus had chosen a different route, chasing one brilliant idea after another. I'd supported him through each venture, each failure, each new beginning. While our parents shook their heads, I'd been his cheerleader, his confidant, his safety net. Opening my laptop, I began pulling up property records for the estate I'd inherited from our grandmother. The Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Cambridge had been her final gift to me, a recognition of the countless hours I'd spent with her in my youth, learning about investments and financial responsibility while Marcus was off pursuing his latest passion. "Your brother has a beautiful mind, Catherine," she'd told me shortly before her passing. "But you have something rarer, wisdom. This house isn't just a property. It's a foundation for your future. Guard it well." The property records loaded, and my blood ran cold. There it was, a recent filing linking my estate to a commercial loan application, a loan I'd never approved. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hey sis, incredible news. Just closed a major funding round. Drinks tonight to celebrate? Your treat, as always." The casual presumption in his message, once endearing, now felt like another manipulation. How many times had I picked up the check, covered his rent during lean months, invested in his ventures? I'd always seen it as investing in his potential. But now, walking to the window, I watched the rain transform the Boston skyline into a watercolor of grays and silvers. The city had taught me hard lessons about money and trust throughout my career. Now it seemed those lessons were about to become painfully personal. My computer chimed with an email from my assistant. She'd pulled the background documents I'd requested on Marcus's new company, Harrison Tech Solutions. The financials painted a troubling picture. Multiple maxed-out credit lines, irregular cash flows, and a pattern of increasingly desperate funding attempts. The grandfather clock in my office, another inheritance from our grandmother, struck 2. In 1 hour, I'd faced the truth about just how far my brother's deception had gone. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, not just for my own assets, but for the trust my clients placed in me. How could I advise others on protecting their wealth if I couldn't protect my own? I gathered my documents with trembling hands, each paper a potential piece of evidence against my own brother. The rain had stopped, but dark clouds still loomed over the city. As I stepped into my car, another text from Marcus lit up my phone. "BTW, might need your financial advice soon. Big expansion plans in the works." If only he knew that in less than an hour, his plans would crumble like a house of cards. And I would be the one holding the decisive card, the truth that would change everything. The morning after confronting Marcus, I arrived at my office earlier than usual. The city was still waking up, streets quiet except for early commuters clutching coffee cups like lifelines. My assistant Jenny's desk sat empty. It would be another hour before she arrived with her usual cheerful efficiency. I needed this solitude to process what lay ahead. My phone had accumulated 37 missed calls overnight, a mixture of family members, mutual friends, and business associates. Word travels fast in Boston's financial circles, and Marcus had already begun spinning his version of events. I scrolled through text messages ranging from concerned to accusatory. "How could you do this to your own brother? He's young, he made a mistake. Family should stick together no matter what." Each message reinforced that I'd made the right decision. The same people quick to judge hadn't been there through years of covering Marcus's mistakes, of watching him charm his way out of accountability while others paid the price. They hadn't seen the pattern I'd enabled for far too long. A soft knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Sarah Chen from the bank stood there, holding a thick manila envelope. "I hope you don't mind the early visit," she said, stepping into my office. "We've completed our initial review of the documentation." I gestured for her to sit, noting how her professional demeanor had softened since yesterday's meeting. "What have you found?" "It's extensive," she began, spreading documents across my desk. "Your brother didn't just attempt to use your property as collateral. He created an entire fictional financial history, using your reputation to validate his claims. Client testimonials, partnership agreements, revenue projections, all fabricated." My stomach churned as I examined the papers. Marcus had gone beyond simple forgery. He'd constructed an elaborate fantasy of success, borrowing credibility from my years of hard work. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd built my career on trust and transparency, he'd used those very qualities to attempt fraud. "There's something else," Sarah added, hesitation in her voice. "In light of this situation, several of your clients have requested meetings to review their accounts. They're concerned about whether they can trust me," I finished. Of course they were. In the financial world, reputation was everything. Marcus hadn't just attempted to steal my property, he'd potentially jeopardized everything I'd spent a decade building. But as I sat there, watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across my office walls, a strange sense of calm settled over me. This wasn't just a crisis. It was an opportunity to demonstrate exactly what Harrison Financial Consulting stood for. I turned to my computer and began drafting an email to my entire client list. No excuses, no deflections, just honest communication. Dear valued clients, you may have heard about recent events involving attempted fraud at multiple financial institutions. The perpetrator was my brother, who attempted to leverage my reputation and assets without authorization. I chose to report this fraud myself, despite personal cost, because integrity is not just a word we use in meetings. It's the foundation of everything we do. I'm available for individual meetings with each of you to discuss any concerns and to demonstrate the robust protections we have in place for your assets. Trust is earned through actions, not words, and I intend to keep earning yours every day. Sincerely, Catherine Harrison. Sarah read the draft over my shoulder, her eyebrows rising. That's unusually direct. It's the only way forward, I replied, hitting send before I could second-guess myself. My grandmother used to say that trust is like fine crystal, beautiful but fragile. Once cracked, it can be repaired, but the process requires absolute transparency and patience. As if summoned by the memory, my eyes drifted to the photograph of my grandmother on my desk. She stood in front of the Victorian house, her expression both proud and knowing. She'd understood something I was only now beginning to grasp, that true strength isn't in protecting people from consequences, but in standing firm when those consequences arrive. My phone buzzed with a new message, this time from an unexpected source. Marcus's chief technology officer. "You should know. Your brother's been calling an emergency board meeting. He's claiming you're trying to sabotage the company out of jealousy. But some of us have noticed discrepancies in the books. If you're building a case, I have documentation you should see." The truth was beginning to ripple outward, touching lives beyond our immediate family. It would be messy, painful, and absolutely necessary. Real growth rarely comes without discomfort, and it was time for everyone, myself included, to embrace that discomfort. I opened my calendar and began blocking out the next few weeks. Client meetings, legal consultations, documentation reviews. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in years, it felt honest. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is stop protecting people from their own choices and start protecting the truth instead. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of my grandmother's Victorian house, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the hardwood floors. I'd come here seeking solace, but instead found something more valuable: clarity. 3. Days had passed since the confrontation with Marcus, and the consequences were spreading like ripples in a pond. My phone lit up with a notification. Another article in the Boston Business Journal. Tech startup under investigation. Harrison Tech Solutions faces fraud allegations. Below it, a comment from a former employee had gone viral. Finally. Someone had the courage to expose the smoke and mirrors. Jenny's voice came through on the intercom of my home office setup. "Ms. Harrison, Mr. Reynolds from Clarity Investment Group is on line 1. He says it's urgent." Thomas Reynolds was my largest client with over $50 million under management. My heart raced as I picked up the phone, but my voice remained steady. "Good morning, Thomas." "Catherine," his voice was grave. "I've just finished reading your email about the situation with your brother. I have to say, it's not what I expected." I braced myself for what would come next. The loss of a major client could trigger an exodus, potentially devastating my firm. But I'd chosen transparency, and I would stand by that decision. "You did exactly what I would have wanted you to do," he continued, surprising me. "When I first chose your firm, it was because you promised honest financial stewardship. By reporting your own brother's fraud, you've proven that wasn't just marketing talk." Relief flooded through me, but Thomas wasn't finished. "I've recommended your firm to several colleagues. They're looking for financial advisors they can actually trust. Expect some calls." As I hung up, my email pinged with a message from Marcus's CTO, David Chen. "Meeting confirmed. I have documentation showing systematic fraud dating back 18 months. Your brother doesn't know I've kept copies." I'd arranged to meet David at a quiet cafe far from the office district. His information could be crucial for the investigation, but something else nagged at me. The realization that others had seen through Marcus's facade long before I had allowed myself to. A text from my mother arrived. "Family dinner tonight. We need to discuss damage control. Your father is devastated." I typed back a firm response. "Can't make it. Meeting with investigators. This isn't about damage control. It's about accountability." My mother's reply was instant. "You're choosing your reputation over family." "No," I responded. "I'm choosing integrity over enabling. There's a difference." A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Sarah Chen from the bank stood there, holding a new stack of documents. "We've uncovered something else," she said, settling into a chair. "Your brother approached several of your clients directly, using your name to solicit private investments in his company. We need to alert them immediately." My stomach dropped. The potential damage to these relationships, to people who had trusted me with their financial futures, was staggering. But instead of panic, I felt a surge of determination. "I'll handle the client notifications personally," I said, already pulling up my contact list. "They deserve to hear it from me, and they deserve to know exactly what we're doing to protect their interests." Sarah nodded approvingly. "The bank's fraud department is impressed with your handling of this situation. They'd like you to consider running a seminar series on financial ethics and fraud prevention." I almost laughed at the irony. My brother's attempted fraud might end up helping others protect themselves from similar schemes. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from our greatest challenges. As Sarah left, I walked to the window of my grandmother's study, where she'd first taught me about the responsibility that comes with managing other people's money. The garden she'd loved was beginning to bloom despite the early spring chill, a reminder that growth often comes after difficult seasons. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unexpected source. Marcus's wife, Lauren. "Can we meet? There's something you should know about the company's finances. Marcus doesn't know I found his second set of books." The layers of deception were still unfolding, but something else was emerging too. A community of people choosing truth over comfort, integrity over loyalty to a lie. Each person coming forward was an affirmation that doing the right thing, though difficult, creates a ripple effect of its own. I opened my laptop and began preparing for tomorrow's client meetings. The story wasn't just about Marcus's fraud anymore. It was about all the people who had been silently waiting for someone to stand up and say, "Enough." Sometimes it takes one person willing to face the uncomfortable truth to give others the courage to do the same. A final email arrived from Thomas Reynolds. "By the way, Catherine, I've recommended you for the Ethics in Finance Award. Your handling of this situation should be a case study in putting principles above personal interests." I smiled, thinking of my grandmother's words about wisdom being rarer than talent. She'd understood that true success isn't just about making money. It's about maintaining your integrity when doing the right thing costs you something. As the sun set over Boston's skyline, I began drafting my acceptance speech, knowing that this story of choosing truth over family loyalty would help others face their own difficult choices. The cafe where I was meeting Marcus's wife, Lauren, was tucked away in a quiet corner of Beacon Hill, far from the financial district's prying eyes. The morning crowd had thinned, leaving only a few students absorbed in their laptops and an elderly couple sharing a crossword puzzle. Lauren arrived, precisely on time, her usual polished appearance showing signs of strain. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth with a thick manila envelope. "I've been debating whether to come forward for weeks." Before she could continue, my phone lit up with a news alert. Harrison Tech Solutions CEO calls. Emergency press conference. I turned the screen toward Lauren, whose face tightened. "He's going to try to get ahead of the story," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But he doesn't know what I found." Lauren had been Marcus's CFO before they married, a detail that had always bothered our parents. They thought it inappropriate for a wife to work for her husband. Now, as she spread documents across the table, I understood why Marcus had wanted to keep her close. "These are the real financial records," she explained, pointing to complex spreadsheets. "Marcus has been running a sophisticated shell game. The loan applications using your property? That was just the tip of the iceberg." My coffee grew cold as Lauren detailed the extent of Marcus's deceptions. He hadn't just attempted to defraud banks, he'd been misrepresenting the company's assets to investors, creating fake client contracts, and using investor funds for personal expenses. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked, studying her face. Lauren's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her tea. "Because yesterday, I found this." She pulled out a final document, a transfer order moving the company's remaining liquid assets to an offshore account. He's planning to run. My phone buzzed again, a text from David Chen, the CTO. "Press conference starting. Turn on channel 7 now." The cafe had a small TV mounted in the corner. When I asked the owner to change the channel, my brother's face filled the screen. He looked impeccable in a custom suit, his expression a perfect mask of righteous indignation. "I stand before you today," Marcus began, his voice carrying that familiar persuasive tone, "as the victim of a calculated attack on my character and my company. My own sister, driven by jealousy and resentment, has fabricated allegations of fraud." Lauren's sharp intake of breath matched my own. We watched in stunned silence as Marcus wove a narrative of family betrayal and corporate sabotage, painting himself as the innovative entrepreneur being attacked by his risk-averse traditional sister. "He's trying to turn this into a personal vendetta," Lauren murmured. "Make it look like family drama instead of fraud." My phone erupted with messages, clients, colleagues, reporters, all wanting comments. But one message stood out, from Sarah Chen at the bank. "We have everything. We need arrest warrant being processed." As if on cue, the cafe's TV showed a commotion at the press conference. FBI agents were approaching the podium. Marcus's face flickered with panic before the feed cut out. "He knew this was coming," Lauren said, gathering the documents. The press conference was a desperate last attempt to control the narrative. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're very brave to come forward." She gave a tired smile. "You know what made me decide? Watching you choose truth over family loyalty. It made me realize I had to choose truth over marital loyalty." As we left the cafe, my phone rang. Jenny, my assistant. "Ms. Harrison, you need to get back to the office. The press is gathering in the lobby, and our client line is ringing off the hook. Also," she added, "your mother is here." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what was to come. But something had changed in me over the past few days. Each difficult choice had strengthened my resolve. Each moment of truth had clarified my purpose. "Tell them I'm on my way," I said. And Jenny, start setting up the conference room. It's time we showed everyone what real transparency looks like. As my car navigated through Boston's morning traffic, I drafted a message to my entire client list. In light of recent events, I'm hosting an emergency client meeting at 2 p.m. Every question will be answered. Every document will be available for review. Every step we've taken will be explained. Because trust isn't just about managing money. It's about facing hard truths together. My mother was waiting in my office, her face a mix of anger and fear. But before she could speak, I held up my hand. Mom, before you say anything, you need to see what Lauren just showed me. Because this isn't about choosing between family and integrity anymore. It's about preventing more people from being hurt. As I spread the documents across my desk, I saw something shift in my mother's expression. The first crack in her denial. The first step toward understanding that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is stop protecting people from the truth. The TV in my office was still showing coverage of the interrupted press conference. But now, instead of feeling pain at seeing my brother's downfall, I felt a strange sense of peace. Sometimes the hardest storms clear the way for new growth, and sometimes the most difficult choices lead us exactly where we need to be. The emergency client meeting I'd scheduled turned into something unexpected. Instead of the angry confrontations I'd anticipated, the conference room buzzed with an energy I hadn't felt since starting my firm. Every seat was filled, with some clients standing along the walls as I presented the complete, unvarnished truth about Marcus's fraud and my role in exposing it. What you're seeing, I explained, gesturing to the detailed timeline projected on the screen, is not just the story of my brother's deception, but a masterclass in how financial fraud can hide in plain sight. I'm sharing this because you deserve to understand not just what happened, but how to prevent it from happening to you. Thomas Reynolds, my biggest client, raised his hand. Catherine, you could have quietly handled this behind the scenes, protected your family name. Why go public? The room fell silent, waiting for my answer. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see news vans still parked outside the building, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like modern totems. Because, I replied, my voice firm, integrity isn't something you practice only when it's convenient. The moment we start hiding truth to protect reputations is the moment we become part of the problem. Sarah Chen from the bank, who had joined the meeting at my request, stepped forward. What Ms. Harrison isn't telling you is that her actions have already led to the discovery of similar fraud attempts at 3 other firms. She's created a ripple effect of accountability in the financial sector. My phone buzzed. Another message from Lauren, who was now cooperating fully with investigators. They found the offshore accounts. All of them. The forensic accountants are saying this could be one of the most significant financial fraud cases in Boston's history. As I updated the clients on the latest developments, something remarkable happened. Instead of withdrawing their investments, they began asking how they could help. One offered his expertise in digital forensics. Another, a retired judge, provided insights into the legal proceedings ahead. We're not just your clients anymore, said Maria Santos, a tech entrepreneur I'd helped navigate her first major investment. We're your partners in showing the world what ethical business really looks like. After the meeting, Jenny caught me in the hallway. Your mother's called 6 times, and there's a reporter from the Wall Street Journal waiting in your office. I checked my watch. Barely noon, and already the day felt a week long. But as I walked toward my office, I noticed something had changed in how people looked at me. The whispers weren't of scandal, but of respect. The reporter, Rebecca Zhang, was known for her hard-hitting exposés on corporate fraud. She stood as I entered, recorder already in hand. Ms. Harrison, your story is fascinating, but I'm more interested in what comes next. How do you plan to rebuild trust in the financial sector after this? Her question sparked an idea that had been forming since the client meeting. Maybe we don't just rebuild, I said, moving to the whiteboard. Maybe we revolutionize. For the next hour, I outlined my vision for a new approach to financial advisory services, one built on radical transparency and collaborative oversight. Every transaction traceable, every decision explained, every process open to client review. You're talking about completely changing how financial firms operate, Rebecca said, scribbling notes. Exactly, I replied. Because this isn't just about one case of fraud. It's about creating systems where truth isn't just encouraged. It's inevitable. As Rebecca left, promising a feature story, my mother finally caught me. She looked older than she had just days ago, the weight of Marcus's actions visible in new lines around her eyes. The police called, she said quietly. They're searching the house. They found documents going back years. Years, Catherine. How did we not see? I guided her to a chair, remembering all the family dinners where we'd celebrated Marcus's successes while dismissing the nagging questions that arose. We saw what we wanted to see, Mom. We all did. My phone lit up with a notification. Another article about Marcus's arrest was trending, but below it was something else. Harrison Financial Consulting sees surge in new clients following fraud exposure. Industry experts cite unprecedented transparency as key factor. Lauren's number flashed on my screen. Just finished another round with the investigators. There's something else you need to see. It's about your grandmother's house. I took a deep breath, preparing for whatever new revelation was coming. But this time, the anxiety was different. Each piece of truth, no matter how painful, was another step toward something better. Send everything, I replied. It's time for the whole story to come out. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across my office, I began drafting a new document. Not another damage control statement or press release, but a manifesto for change. The truth about trust, a new framework for financial ethics. Sometimes I realized the greatest opportunities for transformation come disguised as our worst crises. And sometimes the path to rebuilding trust requires completely dismantling the old ways of doing things. The revelation about my grandmother's house came at sunset, as I sat in her old study surrounded by the evening's golden light. Lauren had arrived with a stack of documents that would change everything I thought I knew about our family's history. Before I show you this, Lauren said, her fingers tracing the edge of a worn leather portfolio, you need to understand something. Marcus didn't just try to use your property as collateral. He was trying to hide something about the house itself. I leaned forward in my grandmother's antique chair, the same one where she'd taught me about financial responsibility all those years ago. What do you mean? Lauren carefully opened the portfolio, revealing yellowed papers and old photographs. Your grandmother, Eleanor Harrison, wasn't just a wealthy woman who left you her house. She was one of Boston's most successful silent investors in the 1960s and 70s. This house? It's not just property. It's the hub of an investment network she built. My hands trembled as I examined the documents. Hidden behind the Victorian walls were decades of financial history, detailed records of investments, partnerships, and strategic decisions that had shaped Boston's business landscape. Your brother found these records 2 years ago, Lauren continued. That's when everything changed. He wasn't just after the property value. He was trying to access your grandmother's old investment network. A message popped up on my phone from Sarah Chen. Forensic team finished analyzing the house records. You need to see this immediately. Within an hour, Sarah arrived with 2 forensic accountants. They spread their findings across my grandmother's mahogany desk, a legacy far more complex than I'd imagined. Ms. Harrison, one accountant began, your grandmother created something revolutionary for her time. She established a network of women investors who operated behind the scenes, helping other women build businesses when banks wouldn't give them loans. The second accountant pointed to a series of numbers. These investments are still active. The network never died. It just went dormant after your grandmother's passing. The annual returns are still being generated, flowing into trusts she established. My mind raced to all the times Marcus had asked about the house's paperwork, his sudden interest in our grandmother's old files. He hadn't just attempted fraud. He'd tried to hijack a legacy of women helping women succeed. There's more, Lauren added softly. The reason Marcus rushed his plans? Several of the original beneficiaries' granddaughters are now prominent. In Boston's tech sector, he was trying to leverage these connections before anyone discovered the truth. A new message lit up my phone, from Maria Santos, my tech entrepreneur client. Just learned my grandmother was part of Eleanor Harrison's network. We need to talk. Sarah Chen's eyes sparkled with possibility. Catherine, do you realize what this means? Your grandmother's model of ethical investing and community support. It's exactly what the industry needs right now. I stood and walked to the window, watching the city lights begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk. The house suddenly felt different, not just a home or an inheritance, but a testament to what women could achieve when they supported each other. We're not just going to expose fraud, I said, turning back to the room. We're going to revive my grandmother's network, but this time, it won't be silent. Jenny burst in, her usual composure cracked with excitement. Ms. Harrison, you need to see the responses to your transparency manifesto. The Wall Street Journal article just went live, and the industry is buzzing. 3 major firms have already reached out about adopting your protocols. Lauren smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in days. Eleanor would be proud. You're not just protecting her legacy, you're expanding it. I gathered the team around the desk, my grandmother's presence almost palpable in the room. Let's draft a plan. We'll combine Eleanor's investment network model with modern transparency practices. Create something that honors the past while building for the future. As we worked into the night, more pieces fell into place. The forensic accountants uncovered links between Eleanor's network and dozens of successful women-led businesses. Sarah Chen began mapping out how we could modernize the investment structure. Lauren's knowledge of modern finance helped bridge the gaps between old and new methodologies. My phone buzzed one final time that evening, a message from Thomas Reynolds. Just read the Wall Street Journal piece. This is bigger than fraud now. This is about changing the whole system. Count me in as your first investor in the new network. I smiled, running my hand along my grandmother's desk. She hadn't just left me a house, she'd left me a mission. Sometimes the greatest acts of integrity don't just expose what's wrong, they reveal what's possible. Jenny, I called out, schedule a press conference for tomorrow. It's time to tell the whole story. Not just about Marcus's fraud, but about Eleanor's vision and how we're going to carry it forward. As the team dispersed for the night, I sat in my grandmother's chair, feeling more connected to her than ever. She'd understood something I was only now learning. True legacy isn't just about preserving the past. It's about using it to build a better future. The morning of the press conference dawned bright and clear, Boston's financial district humming with anticipation. News had leaked about a major announcement from Harrison Financial Consulting, and the crowd outside our building included not just reporters, but dozens of young women in business attire, drawn by rumors about Eleanor Harrison's legacy. In my office, I reviewed my notes one final time while Jenny coordinated with security. The Wall Street Journal article had sparked something unexpected. Women from across the country were reaching out with stories about how Eleanor's network had helped their mothers and grandmothers build businesses. Ms. Harrison, Jenny called. From the doorway, there's someone here you need to meet. An elderly woman stepped into my office, her silver hair elegantly styled, her bearing dignified. Margaret Chen, she introduced herself. I was one of Eleanor's original partners. My heart skipped a beat. Margaret Chen was a legend in Boston's business community, though few knew the full extent of her influence. You worked with my grandmother? She smiled, pulling an old photograph from her handbag. We didn't just work together, we changed lives. The photo showed a group of women, including my grandmother and a younger Margaret, standing in front of the Victorian house. Your brother didn't just attempt to steal property, he tried to erase a revolution. Before I could respond, Sarah Chen burst in. Catherine, you won't believe this. The FBI just found documents in Marcus's office. He was planning to demolish the house, build luxury condos. He had the permits ready. Margaret's face hardened. Just like they tried to do to us in '75. Men who couldn't stand seeing women build power together. But they failed then, I said, understanding dawning. And they'll fail now. Jenny appeared again. 5 minutes to the press conference, and... Your mother's here. Mom stood in the conference room doorway, clutching a familiar leather-bound journal. I found this in the attic last night, she said, her voice thick with emotion. It's Eleanor's diary. There's something you need to see before you speak. The journal entry was dated just weeks before my grandmother's death. My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, you've discovered the truth about the network. Your brother Marcus shows the same hunger for quick success that drove so many men to try to destroy what we built. But you, my dear, have something rarer. The wisdom to understand that true power comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. The house isn't just yours to own. It's yours to use as a force for good. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. It was time. The conference room was packed, cameras ready, faces expectant. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my grandmother's journal close to my heart, what you're about to hear isn't just a story about fraud. It's a story about vision, about women supporting women, and about how the past can light the way to the future. For the next hour, I laid out everything. Marcus's fraud, Eleanor's network, and most importantly, our plan to relaunch the network with full transparency and modern technology. Margaret Chen spoke about the historical impact. Sarah presented the new compliance frameworks we'd developed. But the real surprise came from Lauren, who stepped forward with her own announcement. As part of our commitment to transparency, I'm establishing a whistleblower support program. No one should have to choose between loyalty and truth. The questions flew fast. How will you prevent fraud in the new network? What about male investors? How do you respond to your brother's allegations? Each answer reinforced our core message: integrity, transparency, and the power of community. As I spoke, I could see faces in the crowd lighting up with recognition and hope. A young woman raised her hand. My grandmother talks about how Eleanor Harrison's network helped her start her business. Will the new network provide the same opportunities? Better ones, I replied, because this time we're doing it in the open. No more hidden networks, no more silent partners. We're creating a visible community of support and success. After the press conference, Margaret pulled me aside. Eleanor knew, you know. She knew Marcus would try something like this eventually. That's why she left the house to you. She saw in you what we fought for. The understanding that real success isn't about personal gain. It's about creating opportunity for others. My phone buzzed with messages from across the country. Women wanting to join the network. Investors pledging support. Even other firms asking about implementing our transparency protocols. Catherine, Jenny called out. The governor's office is on line 1. They want to discuss making our transparency framework the new state standard for financial firms. As the day wound down, I returned to my grandmother's study. The setting sun painted the room in shades of gold, just as it had when she taught me my first lessons about money and trust. You were right, Grandma, I whispered to the empty room. Success isn't about what you gain, it's about what you give. And sometimes, the greatest legacy isn't what you leave behind, but what you help others build. The initial euphoria following the press conference lasted exactly 3 days before the pushback began. I arrived at the office Monday morning, to find darn Stop Harrison trending on financial Twitter, with several prominent investment firms claiming our transparency initiative would destabilize the market. "They're scared," Sarah Chen observed, dropping a thick file on my desk. "Look at these numbers. 3 major firms have lost clients to us in the past week alone. They're calling it the Eleanor effect, women moving their investments to firms with proven transparency measures." My computer pinged with an urgent email from the State Financial Regulatory Board. They wanted an emergency meeting about our new protocols, citing concerns about industry disruption. Behind the bureaucratic language, I could sense the old guard mobilizing. "Ms. Harrison," Jenny interrupted. "Mr. Reynolds is here. He says it's urgent." Thomas Reynolds, my biggest client and early supporter, strode in looking troubled. "Catherine, we need to talk. The opposition is getting organized. They're claiming your grandmother's network violated securities laws. They're trying to use your brother's fraud to discredit everything." I was about to respond when Lauren burst in, her face flushed with excitement despite the early hour. "You need to see this. We found something in the old records. Proof that Eleanor didn't just help women start businesses. She helped expose 3 major fraud schemes in the 1970s. She was fighting the same battle we are now." The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. My grandmother hadn't just built a support network, she'd been a whistleblower in her own right. The property that Marcus tried to steal had been a base of operations for financial justice all along. My phone lit up with a message from Margaret Chen. "Meeting of the old guard tonight. Bringing reinforcements. Time to show them what women supporting women really means." As evening approached, the Victorian house filled with an extraordinary gathering. Alongside Margaret came dozens of women, some in their 80s, others the daughters and granddaughters of Eleanor's original network. Each brought records, stories, and most importantly, evidence of the network's lasting impact. "Your grandmother kept everything," one elderly woman explained, spreading documents across the dining room table. "Every loan, every investigation, every piece of evidence. She knew someday someone would try to destroy what we built." Sarah Chen, who had been analyzing the documents, looked up with wide eyes. "These fraud investigations, they're the foundation for modern whistleblower protection laws. Eleanor and her network didn't just help women succeed, they helped clean up the entire industry." A notification popped up on my laptop, another attack piece in the Financial Times. But this time, instead of anxiety, I felt a surge of determination. We weren't just fighting for transparency, we were continuing a legacy of transformation. "Ladies," I addressed the room, "they're not just attacking our initiative. They're trying to erase decades of work by women who fought to make finance more ethical. We need to show them what happens when women stand together." Margaret Chen smiled, that same fierce light in her eyes that I'd seen in old photos of my grandmother. "We've been waiting for this moment. Each of us has daughters and granddaughters in finance now. The network never died. It just went underground. Time to bring it into the light." One by one, the women shared their resources. A judge offered legal support. A tech executive pledged her company's latest blockchain technology for transparency tracking. A media mogul promised platform space for women's financial success stories. As the strategy session continued, Jenny appeared with breaking news. "The attacks are backfiring. Eleanor effect is now trending bigger than Dr. Stop Harrison. Women are sharing stories of how the original network helped their families. The narrative is shifting." My phone buzzed with a message from the prison, Marcus requesting a visit. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I remembered my grandmother's words in her journal about wisdom being rarer than talent. "Tell him I'll come," I replied. "He needs to understand what he really tried to destroy." Later that night, alone in my grandmother's study, I found one final hidden compartment in her desk. Inside was a letter addressed to the next generation. "To those who find this, it read. Remember that true power isn't in what you keep for yourself, but in what you help others achieve. They will try to stop you. They will call you disruptive, dangerous, radical. Wear these words with pride. Every time they attack, it means you're changing something that needs to be changed. The next morning, as I prepared for the regulatory board meeting, I felt a new kind of strength. We weren't just defending our actions or fighting attacks. We were carrying forward a torch that had been lit decades ago, turning a legacy of secret support into a movement for open transformation. Ready for this? Sarah asked as we gathered our presentations. I touched my grandmother's letter in my pocket. They're not ready for us. Eleanor and her network spent years laying the groundwork. Now it's our turn to build something they can't ignore or tear down. The resistance we faced wasn't just about protecting profits. It was about maintaining a system that had always thrived on opacity. But as Eleanor had proven, when women stand together, even the strongest systems can be reformed. The State Financial Regulatory Board meeting wasn't being held in their usual offices. Instead, they'd chosen the Grand Assembly Hall of the Boston Financial Center, a power play designed to intimidate. The marble columns and towering ceilings spoke of old money, established power, and resistance to change. But they hadn't counted on what walked through those doors with me. My name is Catherine Harrison, I began, standing before the panel of stern-faced regulators, and I'm not here alone. Behind me sat row after row of women, daughters and granddaughters of Eleanor's network, current clients, aspiring entrepreneurs, and even some former skeptics won over by our transparency initiatives. We've reviewed your new protocols, the board chairman began, his voice dripping with condescension, and we have serious concerns about their impact on established industry practices. Established practices? Margaret Chen's voice rang out as she stood. You mean the practices that allowed people like Marcus Harrison to commit fraud? The same practices that have systematically excluded women from financial power for generations? Before the chairman could respond, Sarah Chen projected a series of graphs onto the massive screen behind us. These charts show fraud detection, rates under traditional systems versus our new transparency protocols. In just 3 weeks, we've identified and prevented 12 potential fraud attempts that conventional methods missed. Lauren stepped forward next, her testimony carrying the weight of someone who'd seen corruption from the inside. As a former CFO who witnessed fraud firsthand, I can tell you that the current system doesn't just fail to prevent corruption, it actively enables it. The board members shifted uncomfortably as more women stood to share their stories. A restaurant owner described how Eleanor's network had saved her family business when banks refused loans. A tech entrepreneur detailed how our new transparency measures had helped her attract ethical investors. Then came the surprise I'd been waiting for. Thomas Reynolds rose from his seat, commanding attention as one of Boston's most respected investors. I've been in finance for 40 years, he declared, and I'm here to tell you that the Harrison protocols aren't just good for women. They're good for everyone who believes in ethical business. My firm has already adopted them, and our client trust ratings have soared. My phone buzzed with a message from Jenny. BBC World News just picked up the story. They're calling it the Boston Financial Revolution. But the board wasn't finished. Ms. Harrison, the chairman interjected, your brother's criminal actions suggest a pattern of financial instability in your family's approach. The room tensed, but I smiled. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. Let's talk about patterns, I said, signaling Lauren. She distributed thick folders to each board member. These documents show how my grandmother, Eleanor Harrison, and her network exposed 3 major financial fraud schemes in the 1970s. Schemes that your predecessors tried to cover up. The chairman's face paled as he scanned the contents. These weren't just historical records. They were evidence that the old guard had been protecting corrupt practices for decades. What you call established practices, I continued. My grandmother called institutionalized deception. She built her network not just to help women succeed, but to prove there was a better way to do business. Today, we're not just continuing her work, we're expanding it. Sarah Chen stepped forward again, this time with fresh data. In the past week alone, firms adopting our protocols have seen a 40% increase in client trust ratings. The market is speaking, and it's asking for transparency. A young regulator at the end of the panel, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. I've been reviewing these protocols independently, she said, ignoring the chairman's glare. They don't just prevent fraud, they create a framework for genuine financial democracy. I move that we formally endorse the Harrison standards. The room erupted in murmurs as more members of the younger generation on the board voiced their support. The chairman tried to call for order, but the momentum had shifted. My phone lit up with another message, this time from the prison chaplain. Your brother watched the live stream of the hearing. He's asking to make a public statement supporting your reforms. I showed the message to Lauren, who squeezed my hand. Sometimes, truth has a way of changing even those who tried to suppress it. As the board called for a formal vote on adopting our protocols, I thought about my grandmother's hidden letter. Wear their resistance as a badge of pride, she'd written. It means you're changing something that needs to be changed. The final vote wasn't even close. The Harrison Transparency Protocols would become the new state standard, with a recommendation for national adoption. But the real victory wasn't in the vote. It was in the faces of the women around me, seeing decades of hidden support finally stepping into the light. It was in the young regulators choosing truth over tradition, in the established firms realizing that transparency strengthens rather than weakens. Your grandmother would be proud, Margaret whispered as we left the hall. But she wouldn't be surprised. She always said the truth doesn't need to hide. It just needs people brave enough to stand by it. Outside, the evening news crews were gathering, but my attention was drawn to a group of young financial interns watching from the steps. In their eyes, I saw the same fire that must have burned in Eleanor and her network all those years ago. The truth hadn't just taken root, it was blooming into something beautiful. The prison visiting room was quieter than usual, the morning sun casting long shadows through barred windows. Marcus sat across from me, his prison uniform a stark contrast to the designer suits he once wore. The past month's events had left their mark, his usual confident smirk replaced by something more contemplative. I watched the regulatory board meeting, he began, his voice softer than I remembered. Grandmother's network. I had no idea. All this time, I thought the house was just about property value. It was never about the property, I replied, placing Eleanor's journal on the table between us. It was about something you couldn't see because you were too focused on quick success. Marcus touched the journal hesitantly, as if afraid it might burn him. The guard who let me watch the live stream, turns out his mother was one of the women grandmother helped. She started a small accounting firm in '78 when no bank would give her a loan. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Through the door, I glimpsed reporters gathering. The guard apologetically explained that word had gotten out about Marcus's support for the reforms. They want a statement, he said, about why the man who committed fraud is now backing anti-fraud measures. Marcus looked at me, something new in his eyes. Maybe it's time I did something right for once. Not for publicity, but because it's true. As Marcus prepared to speak to the press, my phone buzzed with messages from Sarah Chen. The ripple effects of our regulatory victory were spreading faster than anyone anticipated. 3 major Wall Street firms had announced voluntary adoption of our transparency protocols. A congressional committee was requesting our testimony on national financial reform. But the most surprising message came from Lauren. The tech sector is taking notice. Silicon Valley investors are asking about applying our protocols to startup funding. They're calling it the Eleanor Standard. full transparency from day one. I opened my laptop to find my inbox flooded with emails from around the world. A women's investment group in Singapore wanted to establish an Eleanor Network chapter. A financial technology firm in London was building software to implement our protocols globally. A university in Boston was creating a scholarship for women in finance, named after Eleanor Harrison. Ms. Harrison? The guard's voice pulled me back to the present. Your brother's ready. Marcus stood before the prison press room podium, cameras flashing. But instead of his old performative charm, he spoke with quiet sincerity. I spent years chasing what I thought was success, he began, trying to prove I was smarter, faster, better than everyone else. I saw my sister's integrity as weakness, my grandmother's legacy as just another asset to exploit. I couldn't have been more wrong. He paused, his hands gripping the podium. The Harrison transparency protocols aren't just about preventing fraud. They're about building something my grandmother understood decades ago. That real success comes from lifting others up, not climbing over them. As Marcus spoke, Jenny sent through the latest market data. Firms adopting our protocols were seeing unprecedented levels of client trust and investment. The Eleanor effect wasn't just changing policies. It was proving that ethical business was good business. After the press conference, in a private moment, Marcus handed me a stack of handwritten notes. I've been documenting everything. All the ways the old system encourages fraud. All the warning signs people miss. Maybe it can help strengthen the protocols even further. My phone lit up with another message, this time from Margaret Chen. Eleanor always said the hardest person to change is yourself. Your brother's transformation might be the strongest proof yet that our approach works. Back at the Victorian house that evening, I found Sarah and Lauren working late in the study, surrounded by files. They'd discovered something remarkable in the global response to our protocols. Look at this pattern, Sarah explained, pointing to a map covered in glowing dots. Each light represents a woman-led business that's adopted the Eleanor standard. They're forming their own networks, connecting across borders. The house isn't just a headquarters anymore. It's becoming a beacon. Lauren pulled up a series of photographs on her tablet. These arrived today from around the world. Women are gathering in their own spaces, creating their own versions of this study, building their own networks of support and accountability. As I looked at the images, women in Singapore, London, Dubai, São Paulo, all inspired by Eleanor's vision, I realized our victory at the regulatory board was just the beginning. We hadn't just changed rules, we'd sparked a movement. My mother arrived unannounced, carrying a box of old photographs. I found these in the attic, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Pictures of Eleanor and her network through the years. Look at their faces, the same determination I see in all of you now. As we spread the photographs across Eleanor's desk, the past and present seemed to merge. The women in these faded images had faced their own versions of resistance, their own Marcus-like opponents, their own systemic barriers. But they'd persisted, leaving behind not just a legacy, but a roadmap for change. Your brother's statement. Today, Mom said quietly, it made me realize something. Eleanor's greatest achievement wasn't just helping women succeed. It was proving that change is possible, even in the most unlikely people. The conference hall at Harvard Business School buzzed with anticipation. 6 months after the regulatory board victory, I stood backstage, preparing to deliver the keynote at the first Global Women's Financial Ethics Summit. Through the curtain, I could see faces from every corner of the world, women who had traveled thousands of miles to be part of what the media was calling the Eleanor Revolution. 2 minutes, Ms. Harrison, the stage manager whispered, just as my phone lit up with an urgent message from Sarah Chen. Major breakthrough in the Silicon Valley implementation. The tech giants are on board. All of them. Jenny appeared with a tablet showing live feeds from around the world. In Singapore, women were gathering for their own parallel summit. In London, the Financial Times was running a special series on the global impact of the Eleanor Standard. In Dubai, a group of women entrepreneurs had just launched the Middle East's first fully transparent investment fund. "Catherine," Lauren called softly, approaching with a document in hand. "Marcus sent this from prison. It's his complete testimony about how the old system enabled fraud. The prosecutors say it's already helping them prevent similar schemes across the industry." The stage manager signaled. It was time. As I stepped into the spotlight, I saw not just faces in the audience, but the future we were building together. The past 6 months had transformed our victory at the regulatory board into something far bigger than anyone expected. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "6 months ago, we stood before the old guard and demanded change. Today, we're not just changing the system. We're rebuilding it from the ground up." The screens behind me lit up with real-time data from firms implementing the Eleanor Standard. Trust ratings were at historic highs. Fraud attempts had plummeted. Women-led businesses were securing funding at unprecedented rates. But numbers tell only part of the story, I continued, gesturing to the global livestream feeds. The real revolution is happening in rooms like this around the world, in the conversations between mentors and mentees, in the networks forming across borders and cultures. Margaret Chen, now heading our Global Expansion Initiative, stepped forward to share the latest developments. The Eleanor Network had grown from a local Boston phenomenon to a worldwide movement. Women who had once been shut out of traditional finance were now leading the charge for ethical reform. Last week, Margaret announced, the European Union voted to adopt the Eleanor Standard as its baseline for financial transparency. Asia is following suit. This isn't just about preventing fraud anymore. It's about fundamentally changing how we think about success. A young entrepreneur from Kenya took the stage next, sharing how the Eleanor Standard had helped her secure funding for a revolutionary mobile banking platform. "In my country," she explained, "women have always been the backbone of microfinance. Now we're becoming the backbone of macrofinance too." My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from the prison chaplain. "Your brother's study group on financial ethics has become the most popular program we offer. Even the guards are attending." As if on cue, the next speaker was a former Wall Street trader who had served time for fraud. "The old system teaches us that success means winning at any cost," he said. "The Eleanor Standard shows us that true success comes from winning with integrity." During the lunch break, I retreated to a quiet corner with Sarah and Lauren. They had more news. Our data analytics team had identified patterns that could predict and prevent financial fraud before it happened. The algorithm was built on Eleanor's old case notes, combined with modern technology. "But here's the really interesting part," Sarah explained, pulling up a detailed chart. "The firms with the most women in leadership positions show the lowest risk of fraud. It's like Eleanor knew something decades ago that we're only now proving scientifically." Lauren added her own insight. "The tech sector implementation is revealing something fascinating. When companies adopt full transparency from startup phase, they actually grow more sustainably. It's like sunlight helping a plant grow straight and strong." My mother chose that moment to appear, carrying a package that had just arrived from the National Archives. "They found more of Eleanor's records," she said, her eyes shining. "Documentation of cases she helped build against some of the biggest financial frauds of her time. She was working behind the scenes all along." As we prepared for the afternoon sessions, Jenny brought word that 3 major universities had requested our help in redesigning their business ethics curricula. "They want to make the Eleanor Standard part of every finance student's education," she explained. The summit's afternoon focus turned to the future. Women from 6 continents presented their visions for expanding the movement. a tech entrepreneur from India demonstrated blockchain applications for transparency tracking. A Brazilian economist shared models for adapting the standard to emerging markets. But the most powerful moment came from an unexpected source. A video message from Marcus, recorded in the prison library. What my sister and grandmother understood, and what I failed to see, is that true power comes from empowering others. The old way of doing business isn't just unethical, it's obsolete. As the day drew to a close, I found myself back in the quiet corner, reading a newly discovered passage from Eleanor's journal. To those who carry this forward, remember that every system, no matter how entrenched, can be changed by people, brave enough to imagine something better. The world was finally catching up to Eleanor's vision, but in ways even she might not have imagined. We weren't just changing finance, we were changing the very definition of success. The morning. Headlines hit like a thunderbolt. Major investment firm questions Eleanor Standard results. The attack came from Blackwood Capital, one of the oldest and most powerful firms in the industry. They claimed our transparency protocols were creating dangerous inefficiencies in the market. I stood in my grandmother's study, watching rain streak down the windows as Sarah Chen and Lauren analyzed Blackwood's report. The attack was sophisticated. They'd cherry-picked data, manipulated statistics, and presented half-truths as definitive conclusions. They're scared, Lauren observed, highlighting inconsistencies in their analysis. Look at these numbers. Blackwood's client retention rate has dropped 40% since we introduced the Eleanor Standard. They're losing their grip on the old way of doing things. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Blackwood approached me 6 months ago. They wanted dirt on the family, anything to discredit the standards. I told them to take a hike. Before I could respond, Jenny burst in with, urgent news. Blackwood's CEO is on CNBC right now, calling for a congressional investigation into our methods. But that's not all. Women from within Blackwood are starting to speak out. The television showed a split screen. On one side, Blackwood's CEO making his accusations. On the other, a group of female Blackwood executives holding their own press conference. They were publicly challenging their own company's analysis, armed with internal documents showing how the old system had systematically disadvantaged women and enabled fraud. Catherine, Sarah called from her laptop. You need to see this. Our global partners are responding. Around the world, organizations implementing the Eleanor Standard were releasing their data, complete, unfiltered, and overwhelming in its validation of our methods. The Singapore Exchange published a study showing a 60% reduction in fraud attempts under our protocols. The European Union's Financial Oversight Committee released evidence that companies following the Eleanor Standard were outperforming their peers. Margaret Chen arrived, bringing unexpected allies. The whistleblowers are here, she announced, ushering in a group of former Blackwood employees. They have stories you need to hear. For the next hour, we listened as they detailed decades of systematic corruption hidden behind Blackwood's prestigious facade. One woman, a former senior vice president, shared documents showing how the firm had buried evidence of fraud to protect powerful clients. The Eleanor Standard isn't just threatening their profits, she explained. It's threatening their entire way of life. They built their power on keeping others in the dark. My phone lit up with another message, this time from Thomas Reynolds. Called an emergency meeting of major investors. We're preparing a joint statement supporting the Eleanor Standard. Blackwood picked the wrong fight. Lauren, who had been analyzing Blackwood's market positions, made a startling discovery. They're not just attacking us because of lost clients, she said, pulling up complex financial charts. They're exposed. If full transparency becomes the norm, decades of hidden dealings could come to light. As if confirming her analysis, a notification popped up from the SEC. They were opening an investigation into Blackwood's practices, prompted by evidence from their own employees. The rain outside intensified as we gathered in the conference room for an emergency strategy session. But something felt different this time. The fear that might have once accompanied such an attack was replaced by a steady determination. "Let me handle the response," Marcus offered from prison. "I know their playbook. I lived it. Let me show how the old system corrupts from the inside out." Jenny appeared with more updates. 3 major universities had fast-tracked their implementation of Eleanor Standard training programs. A coalition of tech companies announced they would only work with financial firms following our protocols. The attack was backfiring spectacularly. "Your grandmother faced something similar in '76, Margaret revealed, pulling out old newspaper clippings. "The power brokers tried to discredit her network then, too. Know what she did? She invited full public scrutiny. The truth," she said, "grows stronger in sunlight." Taking her cue, I made a decision. "Release everything," I instructed. "Our team. Every piece of data, every success, every failure, every lesson learned. Let them see what real transparency looks like." As our response rolled out, something remarkable happened. Women within other major firms began coming forward, sharing their own stories of systemic bias and hidden corruption. The attack on the Eleanor Standard had cracked open a dam of truth. "Ms. Harrison," Jenny called from the doorway, "the congressional committee chairs are on the line. They don't want an investigation. They want our help drafting new federal standards." The rain finally began to ease as evening approached. Looking out over the city from my grandmother's study, I could see lights coming on in office buildings across the financial district. In one of those buildings, Blackwood's executives were probably still scrambling to control the narrative. But their time was passing. My phone buzzed one final time that day, a message from a young analyst at Blackwood. "Your grandmother's standards didn't just show us a better way to do business. They showed us we have the power to choose integrity over intimidation. Thank you for showing us we're not alone." The old guard's attack had meant to bury us. Instead, it had only proved what Eleanor knew all along. When you build on a foundation of truth, even the strongest storms make you stronger. The congressional hearing room hummed with tension as I took my seat at the witness table. C-SPAN cameras tracked every movement while social media buzzed with live commentary. 1 week after Blackwood Capital's attack, we weren't just defending the Eleanor Standard. We were about to transform it into national policy. "Ms. Harrison," the committee chair began, "your transparency protocols have sparked what some are calling the biggest transformation in financial services since the Great Depression. But Blackwood Capital claims these changes threaten market stability. How do you respond?" Before I could answer, the doors burst open. A group of Blackwood employees, led by their former senior vice president, Patricia Morrison, strode in. "We request permission to testify," Patricia announced. "We have evidence that Blackwood's claims are not just false, they're covering up decades of systematic fraud." The chamber erupted in murmurs as Patricia's team distributed documents to the committee members. My phone lit up with a message from Sarah Chen. "Turn on Bloomberg. Blackwood's stock is in freefall. Their own shareholders are demanding implementation of the Eleanor Standard." Lauren, monitoring the situation from our office, sent through real-time updates. 7 more major firms just announced adoption of our protocols. The dominoes are falling. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Marcus, testifying via video link from prison, laid bare the psychology behind financial fraud. "The old system doesn't just enable corruption," he explained. "It rewards it. The Eleanor Standard isn't just about transparency. It's about changing the fundamental incentives of finance." As Marcus spoke, Jenny forwarded an urgent message from our global partners. Women-led financial firms across Asia had just formed a coalition pledging to operate exclusively under Eleanor Standard protocols. Europe was following suit. "The question isn't whether these changes threaten stability," I finally addressed the committee. "The question is, what kind of stability are we protecting? The stability of a system that enables fraud, or the stability Of a system that ensures trust? Margaret Chen, sitting in the audience, smiled knowingly. She'd seen this moment coming decades ago, when she and Eleanor first dreamed of transforming finance. Now that dream wasn't just reality, it was becoming law. Thomas Reynolds took the stand next, presenting data from firms that had adopted our standards. Profits haven't suffered, he testified. They've grown. Because it turns out, trust is the most valuable commodity in finance. My mother, watching from the gallery, passed forward a newly discovered letter from Eleanor, dated 1977. The old guard will fight hardest when change becomes inevitable. That's how you know you're winning. As the hearing continued, more revelations emerged. Patricia's team exposed how Blackwood had systematically buried evidence of discrimination and fraud. Former employees from other firms came forward with similar stories. The old system wasn't just breaking down, it was being exposed from within. Ms. Harrison, a junior congressman asked, what happens to the people who built their careers in the old system? I gestured to Marcus on the video screen. We offer them a chance to be part of the solution. My brother isn't just serving time. He's helping design fraud prevention systems. The Eleanor Standard isn't about punishment. It's about transformation. Sarah sent another update. Our data analytics team had just released a study showing how transparency protocols actually strengthened market stability by preventing the accumulation of hidden risks. The evidence was becoming undeniable. There's something else, Lauren messaged. Women in tech are using our standards to create new blockchain-based trading systems. They're building the future of finance on Eleanor's foundation. As the hearing drew to a close, the committee chair made an unprecedented announcement. They would fast-track legislation making the Eleanor Standard the law of the land. But more than that, they were establishing an oversight committee, led by women, to guide the transformation. Outside the hearing room, I found Patricia waiting. You know what really scared Blackwood? She said. Not the lost profits or the exposed fraud. It was seeing their own people choose integrity over power. You showed us we had a choice. My phone buzzed with messages from around the world. Women in finance from Mumbai to São Paulo were celebrating. The Eleanor Standard wasn't just changing rules, it was changing what people believed was possible. Back at the Victorian house that evening, I found my mother in Eleanor's study, reading through old journals. She knew this would happen, Mom said softly. Not just the change, but who would lead it. Listen to this. The next generation won't just fix the system, they'll rebuild it. And they'll do it not through force, but through the irresistible power of truth. The sun set over Boston's financial district, its light catching the windows of towers where the old guard was giving way to the new. In one of those buildings, Blackwood's board was meeting to discuss implementing the very standards they had tried to destroy. Marcus called one last time that day. You know what I realized in here? The house I tried to steal wasn't just property. It was the foundation for something I couldn't even imagine. Something bigger than all of us. As night fell, I sat at Eleanor's desk, adding my own entry to the family journals. Today, we didn't just defend a standard, I wrote. We showed that transformation is possible, even in the most entrenched systems. But more importantly, we showed that change doesn't have to come through destruction. It can come through revelation, through choosing truth over power, through turning opposition into opportunity. 3 months after the congressional hearing, I stood in the East Room of the White House, watching as the president signed the Financial Transparency and Ethics Reform Act, nicknamed the Eleanor Act, into law. But my attention was drawn to the diverse group of women surrounding the signing desk, each with their own. We showed that transformation is possible, even in the most entrenched systems. But more importantly, we showed that change doesn't have to come through destruction. It can come through revelation, through choosing truth over power, through turning opposition into opportunity. 3 months after the congressional hearing, I stood in the East Room of the White House, watching as the president signed the Financial Transparency and Ethics Reform Act, nicknamed the Eleanor Act, into law. But my attention was drawn to the diverse group of women surrounding the signing desk, each with their own story of transformation. Patricia Morrison, once Blackwood's defender, now headed the new Office of Financial Ethics. Sarah Chen had just launched a global technology platform making transparency protocols accessible to small businesses. Lauren was pioneering educational programs teaching the Eleanor Standard in universities worldwide. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Just got approved for early release. They want me to help implement the new standards across the prison education system. Turns out my experience has value after all, just not in the way I expected. Before I could respond, Jenny appeared with urgent news. The World Economic Forum is on the line. They want you to lead a special commission on global financial reform. But that's not all. Blackwood Capital's board just made a historic announcement. The television screens in the East Room switched to a live feed from Wall Street. Richard Sterling, Blackwood's CEO, who had once led the attack against us, stood at a podium looking humbled but determined. Today, Blackwood Capital is not just adopting the Eleanor Standard, he announced. We're transforming our entire organization. Our board will now require 50% female representation. We're establishing a $2 billion fund for women entrepreneurs. And we're opening our historical records for a full audit of past practices. Sarah's data analytics team, monitoring global markets, reported an immediate surge in Blackwood's stock price. The market isn't just accepting transparency, she messaged. It's demanding it. The presidential signing ceremony concluded, but the real work was happening in breakout sessions throughout the White House. Women from every sector of finance were meeting, planning, innovating. The Eleanor Standard wasn't just a set of rules anymore. It was becoming a movement for comprehensive reform. Margaret Chen pulled me aside, her eyes twinkling. Remember when we thought this was just about stopping fraud? Look at what it's become. She gestured to a group of young women entrepreneurs eagerly discussing their plans. These girls will never know a world where they have to hide their power. My mother, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, touched my arm. I found something else in Eleanor's papers, she said, producing a sealed envelope. She left instructions for it to be opened when the world was ready. Inside was a detailed blueprint for what she called the next phase, a vision of financial systems built on collaboration rather than competition, on shared success rather than individual gain. She had seen it all, decades ahead of her time. "Ms. Harrison," called a voice. A young woman in a hijab approached, introducing herself as Amira Hassan from Dubai's Financial Future Initiative. "We've been implementing the Eleanor Standard across the Middle East, but we're finding something unexpected. It's not just changing finance, it's changing culture." Amira shared stories of women in conservative societies finding new paths to economic empowerment through transparency protocols. When systems become transparent, she explained, old barriers start falling naturally. Lauren joined us, bringing news from the tech sector. Silicon Valley's biggest venture capital firms were restructuring their entire investment approach around Eleanor Standard principles. They're calling it ethical scale, the idea that transparency accelerates rather than hinders growth. Thomas Reynolds, who had become one of our strongest allies, shared data from a global survey. Firms operating under the Eleanor Standard were showing unprecedented levels of innovation. Turns out, he noted, when people don't have to hide, they can focus their energy on creating. As evening, the global financial system was realigning around principles that once seemed impossible to implement. "Your grandmother's house is packed," Mom texted. "Women from around the world are there, studying the original documents, planning next steps. It's become exactly what she intended, a headquarters for change." As the sun set over Washington, I thought about the journey from that first discovery of Marcus's fraud to this moment. What had started as a personal betrayal had evolved into a global revolution in how we think about success, power, and trust. Sarah sent through the latest data. Companies under female leadership using Eleanor Standard protocols were outperforming traditional firms by significant margins. It's not just about ethics anymore, she noted. It's about excellence. The day ended with an unexpected call from Richard Sterling, Blackwood's CEO. "We found something in our archives," he said quietly. "Evidence that we actively worked to suppress Eleanor's original network. I think it's time we made that right." Looking out over the capital city, I drafted a message to our global partners. The Eleanor Standard isn't just about preventing what's wrong. It's about enabling what's right. Each of us holds a piece of the future we're building. Together, we're not just changing rules. We're changing what's possible. The renovation of Eleanor's Victorian house was finally complete, transforming it from a family home into the global center for financial ethics. Standing in what was once the living room, now a state-of-the-art conference center, I watched as delegates from 20 countries gathered for the first international summit on transparent finance. 6 months ago, we passed a law. I began my opening address. Today, we're building a new world. The screens behind me displayed real-time data from markets worldwide, all operating under Eleanor Standard protocols. Sarah Chen, now heading our global technology division, unveiled something revolutionary. Project Lighthouse, an AI-powered system that could detect potential fraud patterns before they materialized. "We're not just preventing corruption," she explained. "We're making it obsolete." My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, who had just been released from prison. "Meeting with the Justice Department tomorrow. They want to expand the rehabilitation program nationwide. Turns out reformed fraudsters make the best fraud prevention experts." Lauren rushed in with breaking news. The World Bank had just announced adoption of Eleanor Standard protocols for all international development loans. "But here's the real breakthrough," she added, pulling up detailed analytics. "Developing nations using our transparency systems are showing unprecedented economic growth." The morning's keynote speaker was unexpected. Richard Sterling, former CEO of Blackwood Capital, now a leading advocate for ethical finance. "I spent 30 years fighting against transparency," he admitted to the packed room. "Now I understand what Eleanor Harrison knew decades ago. Trust isn't a barrier to profit. It's the foundation of sustainable success." A young entrepreneur from Kenya took the stage next, sharing how the Eleanor Standard had transformed microfinance in rural Africa. "When women can see the entire financial system clearly," she explained, "they can navigate it successfully. Transparency isn't just about preventing fraud. It's about enabling dreams." During the lunch break, Margaret Chen led me to a quiet corner. "There's something you need to see," she said, producing a weathered envelope. Eleanor left instructions for this to be opened when her work reached global scale. Inside was a handwritten note and a key. The note read, "For the next phase, when changing finance isn't enough, the key opens the door to true transformation." Before I could process this cryptic message, Jenny arrived with urgent updates. The European Central Bank was restructuring around Eleanor Standard principles. China had announced a 5-year plan to implement transparency protocols across its entire financial sector. "But that's not all," Jenny continued. "Remember those blockchain developers who were inspired by our work? They've created something extraordinary." She pulled up a presentation on her tablet. The developers had built a decentralized financial system that encoded Eleanor Standard principles directly into its architecture. Trust wasn't just a policy anymore. It was becoming the underlying infrastructure of global finance. Thomas Reynolds joined us, bringing perspective from traditional investors. "The old guard said transparency would kill innovation," he noted. "Instead, it's sparking a renaissance. When people trust the system, they're more willing to take creative risks." A message from Patricia Morrison lit up my phone. Just finished the final audit of Blackwood's historical records. You won't believe what we found. Evidence that Eleanor's original network prevented a major market crash in 1979. She saved the system from itself, and no one even knew. The afternoon sessions focused on the future. Women leaders from every continent presented innovations building on the Eleanor standard. A team from Singapore demonstrated AI tools for ethical investment. Brazilian economists shared models for transparent cryptocurrency. Marcus arrived unexpectedly, looking transformed in a suit and tie. The Justice Department approved everything, he announced. We're launching ethics education centers in prisons nationwide. But more importantly, major corporations are hiring our graduates. Second chances are becoming real. As the day progressed, the key in my pocket seemed to grow heavier. What had Eleanor seen coming? What was the next phase she had prepared for? The answer began to emerge during the closing panel. A climate scientist presented data showing how financial transparency was accelerating investment in sustainable technologies. A social justice advocate demonstrated how the Eleanor Standard was exposing and correcting systemic inequities. Your grandmother didn't just create a financial standard, Margaret whispered. She created a template for transforming any system built on power and secrecy. That evening, alone in Eleanor's study, I finally tried the key. It opened a hidden panel revealing a collection of journals and plans blueprints for applying transparency principles to government, education, healthcare, and beyond. My phone lit up with a message from Sarah. You need to see this pattern in the global data. The regions with the highest transparency scores aren't just showing less fraud, they're showing better outcomes across every social metric. It's like sunlight helping an entire society grow. As delegates gathered for a farewell dinner in the garden, I watched the next generation of leaders sharing ideas, building connections, imagining possibilities. Eleanor's house had become exactly what she intended, not just a headquarters for financial reform, but an incubator for worldwide transformation. Ms. Harrison, called out a young woman from Dubai. We've been thinking about applying the Eleanor Standard to political systems. Would you be interested in helping us develop that framework? I touched the key in my pocket, feeling the weight of Eleanor's foresight. She had known that once people experienced the power of transparency in one domain, they would naturally seek to expand it to others. The sun set over Boston's financial district, now a global hub for ethical innovation. What had started with a brother's betrayal had evolved into something Eleanor had seen coming all along, a movement not just to reform finance, but to transform how human systems operate. The next phase, I realized, isn't just about money. It's about bringing light to every corner where darkness has allowed corruption to grow. 1 year after discovering Eleanor's hidden plans, I stood on the stage of the United Nations General Assembly, preparing to present something unprecedented. A global framework for transparency across all sectors of society. The Eleanor Standard had evolved far beyond its financial origins. Ms. Harrison, the Secretary General began, you've shown us how transparency can transform finance. Now, you're proposing something far more ambitious. The screens behind me displayed a real-time map of corruption indicators worldwide, overlaid with areas where transparency protocols had taken root. The pattern was undeniable. Wherever light spread, darkness retreated. What began with a brother's betrayal, I addressed the assembly, led us to discover something universal. Corruption, in any system, thrives in shadows. But when we make systems transparent, human potential flourishes. Sarah Chen's team had expanded their AI capabilities far beyond financial fraud detection. Project Lighthouse isn't just about money anymore, she explained, demonstrating how the system could now identify patterns of corruption in government contracts, educational systems, and healthcare delivery. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus, now leading ethics reform programs across multiple industries. just finished training government officials from 30 countries. They're starting to understand. Transparency isn't a threat to power. It's a path to legitimate authority. Lauren, who had been working with educational institutions, shared breakthrough data. Schools implementing transparency protocols were showing dramatic improvements in student outcomes. When systems become clear, she noted, everyone can navigate them more effectively. Margaret Chen approached the podium next, her presence commanding respect. Eleanor Harrison didn't just give us a way to clean up finance, she declared. She gave us a blueprint for social evolution. The assembly hall buzzed as delegates began sharing their own experiences. A minister from Singapore described how transparency protocols had transformed their public housing system. A Brazilian educator explained how similar principles had exposed and eliminated corruption in university admissions. Thomas Reynolds, who had expanded his focus beyond investment, presented compelling evidence. Regions adopting comprehensive transparency showed better outcomes in everything from public health to environmental protection. But here's what's truly revolutionary, he emphasized. These improvements aren't coming from top-down enforcement. They're emerging naturally as people experience the benefits of transparent systems. Jenny interrupted with urgent news. Major tech companies were pledging to open their algorithms to public scrutiny, inspired by the Eleanor Standard. Social media giants were adopting transparency protocols for content moderation. The movement was spreading virally through the digital world. Patricia Morrison, now advising governments worldwide, shared a stunning revelation. Countries implementing these protocols are seeing dramatic increases in public trust. When people can see how systems work, they engage more positively with them. A message from Amira Hassan in Dubai lit up my phone. The transparency revolution is transforming cultural expectations. Young people here aren't just accepting greater openness, they're demanding it. The afternoon session focused on unexpected applications. Healthcare systems using transparency protocols were showing better patient outcomes. Environmental protection efforts were more effective when fully transparent. Even artificial intelligence development was becoming more ethical under Eleanor's principles. Marcus joined virtually from a global ethics conference. We're seeing something remarkable in rehabilitation programs. When people understand how systems actually work, they're more likely to work within them legally and ethically. As the UN presentation continued, I shared Eleanor's hidden journals, now digitized and available worldwide. She saw this coming, I explained. She knew that once people experienced genuine transparency in one area, they would naturally seek it in others. The Secretary General raised an intriguing point. Could these principles help address global challenges like climate change and poverty? The question sparked intense discussion among delegates. Sarah's team projected new data. Regions with high transparency scores were showing faster progress on sustainable development goals. It's like we found a universal catalyst for positive change, she observed. Lauren added research from behavioral scientists. When systems are transparent, people naturally act more ethically. It's not about enforcement, it's about enabling our better nature. As evening approached, delegate after delegate rose to share commitments to implementing comprehensive transparency in their nations. What had started with a property dispute had evolved into a global movement for fundamental change. My mother, watching from the gallery, passed down a note. Eleanor would be amazed, and then she would say, "Of course." She always said that truth once unleashed has a power of its own. The final speaker was unexpected, a young activist from a country known for corruption. "In my homeland," she said, "we were taught that some darkness is necessary. Now we see that light doesn't weaken systems. It strengthens them by allowing them to work as intended." As the session ended, I received one last message from Marcus. "Remember when I thought grandmother's house was just valuable property? Now I understand. It was never about the building. It was about building something in all of us. The sun set over the UN building, its glass walls reflecting the changing light. In those reflections, I saw what Eleanor had seen, that transparency isn't just a policy or protocol. It's a fundamental force for human progress, waiting to be unleashed in every sphere of life. The next phase, I told the closing session, isn't about implementing standards. It's about reimagining what's possible when we choose to build everything on a foundation of truth. 5 years to the day after discovering Marcus's attempted fraud, I stood in Eleanor's study, now the heart of a global movement. The Victorian house had transformed from a family home into a living monument to transparency and change. But today was special. Marcus was coming home. The parole board was impressed, his lawyer had said. Your brother's work implementing ethics programs has transformed prison rehabilitation nationwide. They're calling it the Harrison method, using personal experience with fraud to prevent it. As I waited, my phone lit up with updates from around the world. Sarah Chen reported that Project Lighthouse had just prevented its millionth fraud attempt. Lauren's educational initiatives had reached schools in over 100 countries. Patricia Morrison had successfully implemented transparency protocols in government agencies across 5 continents. Ms. Harrison, Jenny called from the doorway. They're ready for you in the main hall. The house's grand living room, now a contemporary conference space, was filled with faces from our journey. Thomas Reynolds, Margaret Chen, Amira Hassan, leaders who had taken Eleanor's vision far beyond what anyone imagined. But today wasn't about celebration. It was about next steps. 5 years ago, I began, a betrayal taught us something profound. Systems built on secrecy don't just enable corruption, they prevent human flourishing. Today, we're seeing what happens when we choose a different path. The screens displayed global impact metrics, corruption rates plummeting, innovation soaring, trust in institutions rebuilding. But the most powerful numbers weren't financial, they were human. Communities healing, opportunities expanding, potential unleashing. A message from the UN Secretary General appeared. Transparency protocols have become the new standard for humanitarian aid. Trust is rebuilding in regions where it had been destroyed. Before I could continue, there was a commotion at the entrance. Marcus stood there looking both nervous and determined. The room fell silent as he walked forward, each step carrying the weight of transformation. 5 years ago, he began, his voice steady, I tried to steal this house because I thought success meant taking what you want. Today, I understand what Eleanor knew. True success comes from creating value for others. Lauren projected his prison reform statistics. Recidivism rates had dropped 70% among participants in his program. The Harrison method doesn't just prevent fraud, she explained. It transforms how people think about success itself. Sarah shared new data showing an unexpected pattern. Regions with high transparency scores weren't just seeing less corruption, they were experiencing cultural renaissance. Art, innovation, and community engagement were flourishing in the light of open systems. Your grandmother foresaw this, Margaret noted, holding up Eleanor's final journal. She wrote, when we remove the need to hide, we free human energy for creation rather than concealment. As if confirming her words, my phone buzzed with news from around the world. A Middle Eastern nation had just opened all government processes to public view. A major tech company had made its AI systems fully transparent. A global education initiative had adopted Eleanor standards for academic integrity. Thomas Reynolds presented research showing how transparency was reshaping power itself. Leadership is no longer about controlling information. It's about facilitating open collaboration. Amira Hassan shared how transparency protocols had transformed her region. When systems become clear, artificial barriers fall. Women who were once excluded are now leading innovation. Marcus stepped forward again, this time with purpose. I've spent 5 years teaching others about the true cost of fraud. But today, I want to talk about the value of truth. He unveiled a new initiative, global ethics education programs built on personal transformation. We're not just preventing corruption, he explained. We're showing people a better way to succeed. My mother, who had been quietly observing, touched my arm. Eleanor left one final message, she said, producing a sealed envelope, to be opened when the circle completes. Inside was a single page, Eleanor's handwriting still crisp. To those who found the light, remember that transformation never truly ends. Each victory opens new horizons. Keep building, keep growing, keep shining truth into dark corners. The greatest changes come not from fighting darkness, but from creating so much light that darkness has nowhere to hide. As evening approached, we gathered in the garden where this journey began. The old property that Marcus had once tried to steal had become a beacon of global change. But looking at my brother now, seeing the light of purpose in his eyes, I realized something profound. The real legacy, I told the gathered leaders, isn't in protocols or systems. It's in proving that anyone can transform when they choose truth over deception, creation over destruction, light over darkness. Sarah's team projected a final set of statistics. 1 million lives directly improved, 1 billion indirectly affected, countless opportunities created. But the most powerful metric was the simplest. Hope was rising worldwide. As the sun set on this chapter of our journey, Marcus and I stood in Eleanor's study one last time. I tried to steal a house, he said softly, and instead found a purpose. That's what Eleanor knew, I replied. Sometimes our greatest mistakes lead us to our greatest contributions. The house hummed with activity. Leaders planning next. Steps. Innovators designing new applications. Young people imagining possibilities. What had started with a property dispute had evolved into a movement for human potential. Ready for what's next? Marcus asked. I touched Eleanor's final letter, feeling the weight of legacy and possibility. The truth is, I smiled, we're just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.